Hello, I'm Wendy Abbott and my work is called The Partial Eclipse. I was born in 1943, towards the end of the war, and we lived in a house in Armley. I was ill a lot of the time as a child and I spent a lot of time in bed. My mother remembers that the only way she could keep me occupied was with paints and paper, and it was a rather dark, dingy house. It was a rather dark, dingy street, but my mother was always optimistic. She always used to say, "Oh, forget all this rubble and this, that and the other. Look up at the sky, look at the clouds, look at that amazing sunset. If only you could paint that sunset, nobody would believe you." My father was apprenticed as a printer and he worked in Leeds, and the place that he worked at printed poetry, textbooks for schools, and the ends of the pieces of paper were put in a bin, and the people who worked there could bring home wadges of this paper. So I just had a constant supply of oddly shaped bits of paper. It was great. But there weren't many universities doing fine art at that time. There was Durham, which later became Newcastle. I quite liked the idea of going to a place that had new avant-garde ideas and people working in it. I went up for an interview and I liked it. I think Terry Frost may have been on the panel. I was accepted and I had no hesitation. I didn't bother going to any other interviews. I thought, well, this is the place for me. Rich Hamilton was running the basic course. Now the course I found really interesting. We did drawings in the studio, experiments, taking a line for a walk, all sorts of innovative little things. So we got to use all sorts of materials and work with clay, making models out of clay. I think Richard was quite good technically. He taught us how originally, because none of us had any money, he taught us how to cut up a piece of hardboard and put buttons on the back of 1 inch square wood and panel pin them in. But he was meticulous about how you then had to fill the panel pin holes and sand it all down and prime it and then sand it umpteen times to get this wonderful surface. He was a real stickler for that. And then of course Kenneth Rowntree would come round and talk to us, and we had visiting lecturers. So we had Terry Frost and Joe Tilson. He lent me a book on aircraft camouflage. I remember that. And some of those roundels and camouflage paintings came from that period. Terry Frost was good because, again, you could ask him all sorts of questions. He'd come round to the studio, talk to everyone. At one point, I was trying to paint these paintings with very dark blues and blacks, and he said, well, the only way to achieve this is to mix it with wax. You can't just do it, it will look dead. And this is how Partial Eclipse was painted. I was doing so many paintings. I remember Claude Rogers, he was one of the visiting lecturers, and I'd been trying to paint these dark blue lines and not doing very well, very fine dark blue lines, and he said, well, you know, you're just not working hard enough. If you want something specific, you have to go over and over and over it again. And I remember Victor Pasmos pointing it out, and I felt so proud, you know, that he pointed this painting out as being, that's an interesting painting. Both my parents were very ill and there was no one else to look after them. My mother had heart trouble and was in and out of hospital a lot. My father was diagnosed with cancer and had to go to hospital a lot. I couldn't just go off and do nothing. So I moved back to Leeds and moved back to the house and looked after them as best I could when they needed me to. I didn't have anywhere to paint in my parents' cottage, and I'd met a person called Cloden Dallas at women's groups in Reading. I'd joined the Women's Liberation Group and we were quite active. She found out that I had nowhere to paint and she said, well, come and have a studio in my house because it's huge and I'm rattling around in it. So I was constantly moving backwards and forwards from doing my paintings and looking after my parents. Now, how I came to meet Lawrence Gowing was Audrey and Stanley Burton were thinking of setting up a gallery and paintings in their name as a bequest, and they'd approached him to go around and find all the artists in Leeds. He knew that I had a studio in Leeds. He liked my work, and he purchased the painting Partial Eclipse and one or two others, I think, for the Burton collection, and that's how that painting came to be in the Burton collection. Artists need to put all their efforts into saying something. All right, nobody may listen, but we as artists we can say something, we can do something. It doesn't matter if you're not going to get exhibited. You will know that you've done something, you've tried. You will have come into the world by things that you love, things you've seen, things you've done. Carry on with those and have fun, love doing it. What other reason would you have for taking a part?